A Russian man claiming to hold top-level secrets about Russian advanced bombers has just turned up at the US southern border, seeking asylum. The man claims to have been an engineer at a production facility over in the city of Kazan, and he says that he possesses top-secret information about the White Swan Tu-160, which is the most advanced bomber in the Russian arsenal. US border officials, they interviewed the man, and they determined that his story was in fact credible and eventually passed him off to the FBI, who are still in the process of interrogating him right now. However, analysts have pointed out that the fact that the story was even leaked to the public is an indication that perhaps the American government is encouraging other Russians who also hold top-level secrets to also escape to America. And if you thought that was interesting, well then you should click on that button below this video and check out Epic TV, one of the best no-censorship video platforms on the internet. On there you will find awesome programs like American Thought Leaders.
We've now been, for 2 years, trying to obtain the unredacted emails. We're down to the last 50 pages. So that's where all the incriminating evidence is.
Crossroads.
One of the big things happening right now is what's taking place with Russia and China.
Counterpunch.
You will see information you've never seen anywhere else.
Facts Matter. I'm your host, Roman from the Epic Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free. As well as a plethora of great documentaries, wholesome movies that you can enjoy with your whole family.
If I reach 1 hour, I accomplish something.
Cooking programs, and my absolute favorite, programs about traditional art and traditional music, which can honestly uplift your mood and fill you with hope for the future. And the best thing about Epic TV, at least in my opinion, is that there's no corporate backing and there's no allegiance to some anti-American agenda.
How dare you come to this peaceful community and try to scam these people?
What the hell are you talking about?
But rather, it's just good, honest, wholesome content that's based in truth and tradition.
I saw him. It was incredible.
Something that you can actually sit down with your whole family and enjoy, knowing that some ideology is not about to be pushed upon you.
And who's fighting it? We're fighting it here at Epoch Times, and we need to keep bringing you the news.
And so again, if you'd like to check out Epic TV, just click on that button below this video. You and your family will absolutely love it.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm doubly glad to be back. And one of the things I missed the most were your smiling faces every Tuesday. Having said that, with all the skepticism about whether anything could be accomplished on a bipartisan basis, it seems to me that the energy bill that the House passed on a bipartisan basis was not given enough attention in terms of potential accomplishments during this divided government. So I would encourage the Majority Leader to take another look at the House-passed energy bill, bring it up, give us a chance to offer amendments, and let's see if we can surprise everyone and actually achieve some important bipartisan accomplishments for the country during this period of divided government.
Well, today is tax day. Of course, for Democrats, every day is tax day, but this is the point in time when people across this country have to get their tax returns in. So it's not, in most cases, a very popular day for the American taxpayer. And the Democrats, of course, in their budget this year proposed increasing taxes almost another $5 trillion, $4.7 trillion in new taxes, and that's on top of the $318 billion in taxes that were included just in legislation that they passed last year. So this is all part of what happens when Democrats control government in Washington. They raise taxes, they increase spending, and they grow government. That's the very simple formula. And one of the ways that they try and do that is to increase funding for the IRS. So the so-called Inflation Reduction Act included $80 billion in new IRS funding to hire an additional 87,000 employees. In 2025, there will be 105,000 employees at the IRS, a 45% increase over this year. New IRS employees. That's five times, more than five times the number of border agents we have policing the southern border. And what's remarkable about all that isn't that they are trying to improve taxpayer services, which desperately need to be improved because, as everybody knows, in the last 2 years of the number of calls that went into the IRS, I think in 21, 11% got answered, and in 2022, got up to 13% of those calls actually got answered, and that's literally hundreds of millions of calls into the IRS not responded to. So what do the Democrats do when they increase all this funding for the IRS and all these new employees? They shove them into enforcement instead of taxpayer services. Today, the ratio of people who are involved in enforcement at the IRS to those who are actually responding to taxpayer services is 2 to 1, 2 enforcement for 1 taxpayer services. Under this new legislation that has passed, and as I said, the 105,000 employees will have in 2025, that ratio goes to 14 enforcement employees for every one included in taxpayer services. This is something that Danny Werfel, the Commissioner of the IRS, is going to get questioned about tomorrow in front of the Senate Finance Committee. But I think on behalf of the American people, it's up to us to try and hold this agency accountable and realize that in the end it's the American people who are paying the price for all this, and what they're going to get caught up in is a lot more audits and a lot less service.
Well, Joe Biden is trying to force-feed American drivers expensive electrical vehicles that they don't need, they don't want, and they can't afford. Joe Biden is trying to put the federal government in the driver's seat as people make decisions on something that is a very personal decision and an expensive decision in terms of what they purchase. And the bad news about these regulations, these come on top of the crushing inflation that so many people in this country are currently living under. So Joe Biden first came after our gas stoves, and now he's decided that by 2023, 2/3 of all the vehicles sold in the United States need to be electric vehicles. Well, I would say to the President, in spite of the mandates, in spite of the very hefty subsidies, people still don't want and cannot afford these expensive electric vehicles, and additional subsidies isn't the answer. On average, electric vehicles last month in this country cost $62,000. That's $16,000 more than the cost of traditional vehicles. Well, expensive electric vehicles may work well for people in big cities who don't drive very far. But if you live in rural America, you're in Wyoming, you're a farmer, you're a rancher, for families all across the country, they want vehicles that are affordable and reliable, and electric vehicles are neither. The batteries themselves are extremely expensive, they're unreliable, they don't have much range, and they take a long time to recharge. So who's the big winner in Joe Biden's policy here? The big winner is China, because they're the ones that sell us the batteries. I would expect in the future the batteries to come with a Made in China label, because that's where the batteries are made. And the reason is that China has cornered the world market on the minerals that are needed to create those batteries. They've done so. And so once again, Joe Biden is selling out America to China. And the reason I say this is even his own White House has said China will be big players in the president's energy agenda. Big players. Well, these big players of China right now are getting richer off of us, getting stronger off of us, as we, through our energy policies, are getting weaker and poorer. So we know why we have this energy policy, because Joe Biden has surrendered America's energy policy to the climate extremists. And with it goes our wealth and our national security. When these regulations come out, I am going to make sure that every senator in this chamber is put on record having to vote on where they stand for this reckless policy. On Thursday, the Secretary of Energy will be with us in front of the Energy Committee, and I'm going to have her answer questions regarding why they continue down this treacherous path while all the warning signs are flashing.
I had a great couple of weeks back home in Iowa, going around the state, talking about the Farm Bill and visiting with a lot of stakeholders. And of course, while I was at home is when Biden's EPA came out with their radical new Green Deal or Green New Deal, whatever they call it now, regulations that are pushing Americans towards those electric vehicles that the chair just talked about. Never mind the fact that the average American can't afford these vehicles. If you look at my hometown of Red Oak, Iowa, I maybe know of perhaps one family in the community that has an electric vehicle. And I don't even know how they charge it. But what we do know, electric vehicle batteries, they depend on minerals including lithium and cobalt. Lithium and cobalt. So let's take a look at the facts. China produces about 75% of all lithium-ion batteries that power those electric vehicles. And over 70% of the world's cobalt mining occurs in the Democratic Republic of Congo, done by child labor. Children as young as 4 years old. The remainder of the cobalt primarily does come from Chinese-owned firms. And, of course, to mine all of these minerals, the Communist Party of China relies on slave labor. So all of these greenies out there that are pushing the electric vehicles, they think they have the moral high ground with these vehicles. And I'll remind you all again that we are, one, supporting the Communist Party of China with the efforts of these electrical vehicle batteries, but also supporting child and slave labor. Bottom line, Biden's hurting America with these initiatives. His out-of-touch Green New Deal agenda is increasing our U.S. reliance and on our pacing threat and on the child and slave labor. I can't say it enough. I did fight this last year when we were going through the National Defense Authorization Act to prohibit the DOD from purchasing EVs made with forced labor. And you know what? Democrats agreed, and we won that fight. This year, Republicans are redoubling our efforts to unleash American energy, not reliant upon child and slave labor, and allowing for the mining and refining process right here in the good old United States of America. So again, folks, let's stop handing our dollars to the Communist Party of China and allowing that slave and child labor to continue. Let's focus on American jobs and American energy.
Well, I hope everybody enjoyed us not being here and had a nice Easter with your family and friends. And it's great to be back here with you, Leader. We missed you, and we're glad you're here. And so I'd like to talk just briefly about the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. I'm now calling it the Inflation Act because over the last, it was rushed, it was partisan, and it promised all kinds of benefits to states such as mine of West Virginia, when in reality we see now as it's unfolding that the Democrats, have been sold really a bill of goods. We were told originally it would invest $300 billion in deficit reduction and $369 billion in energy security and climate change over 10 years. But now CBO is saying that the Inflation Act will not even, it adds $60 billion to the debt in the first 5 years and won't even see any kind of deficit reduction until 2029. This is also in addition to the enhanced power of the IRS that Senator Thune talked about it, and seeing how that's going to unfold, because apparently that's supposed to pay for everything in the Inflation Act. But if we look at independent observers of this bill, Goldman Sachs estimated that the law's climate spending costs $1.2 trillion over the next decade, which is 3 times as much as CBO scored it for last summer. The Brookings study estimates that carbon capture tax credits will cost $210 by the year 2040, which is another $167 billion more than was predicted last summer by CBO. Brookings also projects that the law's climate provisions could cost up to $1 trillion through 2031. And lastly, the Credit Suisse report last year estimated that a special tax credit to boost U.S. solar, wind, and battery supply chains would cost about $250 billion. That projection now is 8 times more than what CBO projected. This is filled with spending, filled with unmatched deficits, the Inflation Act, and I think it's going to lead to all of the problems we've seen with more problems with inflation, hurting energy costs, hurting the average American citizen, and you pile on that everybody's going to be buying an EV for how much ever more. I think the American public are waking up and they see what kind of damage has been done.
Well, the weather forecast in Montana is for more snow tomorrow, for those of you who are playing at home, which is a good thing for keeping our snowpacks high. But we've had a really cold winter and a lot of snowpack, and we're grateful for it. It was about time we had it. But I would tell you, the Biden administration has not learned anything about what's happened in Europe as it relates to a green hallucination. We are following, because of Joe Biden's leadership as a nation, taking us off the green cliff. The Biden administration seeks to overhaul this economy to fit its green dream. But I've said this back home, and I'll say it here. As you think about the future of energy in our economy, you can't burn today's bridge until you build and validate the future bridges. Democrats want to tear down and eliminate conventional sources of energy when renewables are not yet ready for prime time. This administration started off by killing the Keystone XL pipeline. That comes right into Montana, 1 million barrels a day from our friends in Canada, banning gas stoves while inflation rages. And now, maybe they made this announcement when we were out of town, but Montanans are shaking their heads. What are they thinking about to mandate that 2/3 of our new vehicles have to be electric by 2032? In Montana, we haul crops, we haul cattle, we haul them long distance. We need reliability. As I mentioned, these batteries don't work that well when it gets real cold, and it'll be snowing tomorrow in Montana, and we're getting into the back half of April. By the way, in Montana, we have 85 charging stations. That is one for every 1,700 square miles. States out in the West, big states like Montana, like Wyoming, cannot make anything that Biden's proposing work. Instead of forcing the heavy hand of government to execute their green hallucination, I would highly urge and greatly urge President Biden and the Senate Democrats to let the free market decide what should be successful and what we do in the future in terms of powering our vehicles.
Since you've been out, you haven't operated about the indictment of former President Donald Trump. Are you comfortable with the fact that your party's leading candidate for president is facing criminal charges and could be facing a trial in the middle of this election?
Well, Manu, let me put it this way. I may have hit my head, but I didn't hit it that hard. Good try.
Leader McConnell, can I expand on that a little bit? The former president, when he was arraigned, said Republicans in Congress should defund the DOJ and FBI. Is that something Republicans in Congress should be doing or something you would support?
I think I can pretty safely say that I've not met any Republicans in Congress who want to spend less on law enforcement. We have a crime wave all across America. We have open borders. The last thing we want to do is spend less. We ought to be looking for ways to spend more on law enforcement.
Leader McConnell, do you have any comments on the reports of the hospitality that Justice Clarence Thomas received from Harlan Crow and the Judiciary Committees plan to hold hearings on the ethical standards of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, the Supreme Court and the court system is a whole separate part of our Constitution. And the Democrats, it seems to me, spend a lot of time criticizing individual members of the court and going after the court as an institution. For example, my counterpart went over in front of the Supreme Court and called out two of the Supreme Court justices by name and actually threatened them with some kind of reprisal, I don't know what kind, if they rule the wrong way in a case that he cared about. The Attorney General seemed to be largely unconcerned with security issues around the homes of Supreme Court members. I have total confidence in the Chief Justice of the United States to deal with these court internal issues.
Leader McConnell, can you talk about...
Gather round, people, wherever you roam. Where's that from, young people? You are, yes.
What, some famous Yankee you were quoting yesterday?
Yogi Berra. Okay, thanks everybody, and thank you for being here. Let me thank Senators Stabenow, Merkley, and Smith for joining me. Well, we just wrapped up a great lunch to kick off our... Thank you. It's usually my job. to kick off this 5-week work period. We have a lot to do, starting with Fire Grants and Safety Act, which I expect will finish and pass this week, to Julie Sue's hearing to be Secretary of Labor, and tomorrow's all-senator briefing on the leaked Ukraine documents. So we're off to a busy start. But we're not just thinking about this week. We're focused on the next few. One big part will be preserving the full faith and credit of the United States, one of the most important responsibilities this Senate can ever face. It requires cooperation. It requires bipartisanship. It requires leaders who can instill confidence and calm the markets and working families alike, something House Republicans would be very wise to understand. Yesterday, Speaker McCarthy delivered a speech. He traveled all the way to New York to deliver a speech with no new substance, no new facts or details, and most importantly, no plan. I'll be blunt. If Speaker McCarthy continues in this direction, he is heading the country into default. Let me say that again. If Speaker McCarthy continues in this direction, he is heading the country into default. A first-ever default would be a nightmare for our economy and for American families who would suffer from increased costs, job losses across the board. And just as troubling, it's becoming clearer and clearer that the Speaker does not have the votes to avoid default. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats stand ready to deliver for the American people and avoid a default, while Republicans in the House and across the country are in chaos. Republicans, the self-proclaimed anti-regulation party, have sure been keen on some regulations as of late. Today, the governor of Florida is meeting with a group of hard-right GOP extremists here in D.C. As the governor comes to the nation's capital, the ink is still not dry on the bill he signed a few days ago, banning practically all abortions in Florida after 6 weeks. Idaho is now the first state to explicitly outlaw out-of-state abortions. That's sinister. Freedom of choice is not the only victim of GOP radicalism. Over 11,000 Americans have died from gun violence in the U.S. this year. What do Republicans do? Nothing, except expel state representatives who dare speak out against GOP inaction, as the Tennessee State House despicably did to 2 members of color earlier this month. Republican radicalism is even taking aim at law enforcement. A few weeks ago, President Trump called for cutting funding to the Department of Justice and the FBI because of personal grievances. And just as troubling, we still yet to hear from Speaker McCarthy or so many Republican leaders speaking up against this dangerous idea. But there's good news. The members of this chamber will have a chance to do the right thing and stand up for federal law enforcement later this week. That's because today I'll be introducing a resolution denouncing the former president's call to cut funding to our federal law enforcement. And senators will choose between standing with President Trump and his dangerous views that we ought to cut funding for law enforcement and the FBI, or they will stand with the public servants who even risk their lives to keep America safe. Do Republicans agree with President Trump that funding for federal law enforcement who guard against terrorism and CCP encroachment should be cut or eliminated? Again, this is the kind of resolution that should pass unanimously. If Senate Republicans block this provision, they'll be telling the American people that the GOP has been utterly consumed by extremism, where not women, not schools, not even federal law enforcement are safe. So I promise you this. Senate Democrats will not be dissuaded or deterred by radical Republican agenda across the country. We'll keep working for the American people, delivering results, giving families the tools, the resources they need to lead a better life. And now, Senator Stabenow. Wherever she may be.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just stress again that Republicans say they will let our country default. Let our country default unless they get what they want. Still trying to figure out what they want, but one thing that they talk about all the time is that they want to take food away from families and children and seniors and veterans and people with disabilities. Let me just stress that for folks in need in this country who are falling on tough times, the average SNAP amount of help is $6.10 a day. So probably a lot of folks here, I know for me, I spend more than that on a cup of coffee. $6.10 a day per person. Evidently, they think that's too much. And they also talk a lot about work requirements, and I want to say as the chair of the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee, newsflash, SNAP has work requirements. SNAP has work requirements. Work requirements have been in place since 1977. They were strengthened under President Clinton's welfare reform proposed in 1996. During COVID, they were suspended like other work requirements. They come back on in July. We have work requirements. Now, if you have a child under age 6, or you're a senior, or you're disabled, and so on, there are exemptions. But the reality is, the House Republicans in particular, seem to want to find ways to make it harder and harder for people just to get a little bit of help, $6.10 a day to help pay for food for their families during hard times. And let's be clear, this is a non-starter. It's also important to note, as Senator Schumer said, that President Trump and Republicans want to defund our top federal law enforcement agencies. They wanted to fund the police, to fund the top federal police agencies, law enforcement agencies. Why? Because they're upset that President Trump's finally being held accountable for his actions, I think. The Department of Justice and FBI work every day to catch dangerous criminals and to keep them off the streets. This move proposed by President Trump and the Republicans would make our communities less safe. And it's an attack on the hardworking men and women who protect us. So Republicans have an agenda, and it's not good for American families.
Senator Merkley.
Extremist Republicans are stymieing the debate over gun safety across America. 108 days into the year, 160 mass shootings, 3 9-year-olds, 3 adults in Nashville, Tennessee elementary school, shot 3 weeks ago, killed, 5 dead, 8 injured a week ago Monday at Old National Bank in Louisville, Kentucky. Just a few days passed and there was another shooting in Louisville last Saturday, 2 dead, 4 injured. The shooter shooting into a park. 4 dead, 32 injured at a Sweet 16 party in Dadeville, Alabama. It's a mass shooting every 16 hours on average across America. Robert Kennedy spoke of the mindless menace of violence that stains our land and every one of our lives. He was speaking back in 1968, but he might have been describing mass shootings in America today. Where is safe in America? Not our schools, not our churches, not our parks, not our grocery stores, not our banks, not our children's birthday parties. But extreme Republicans refuse to lift a finger to try to make things better. Lawmakers, funded by the gun lobby, throw up their hands and say nothing can be done, while they maneuver behind the scenes to make sure nothing will be done. And in Tennessee, extremist Republicans would literally rather expel their democratically elected colleagues than have a conversation about how to address gun violence. 2 legislators expelled for advocating for debate on gun safety reforms. How undemocratic is that? How extreme is that? rather desecrate democracy than seek legislative solutions. Democracy only thrives when we have a free exchange of ideas, a free discussion of pressing issues of the day, and this is certainly one of those pressing issues. This radical Republican extremism, which chooses to tear down a democratic institution rather than deal with the real issues before us, must end.
Senator Smith.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So this week, Republicans are launching yet another attack on women's freedom to make their own health care decisions without interference from politicians. This is how extreme they are. They are going after veterans now. When a veteran needs access to abortion to protect her life or her health or because she's experienced rape, these radical Republicans want to deny that person access to the medically needed care. This will literally put women's veterans in life or death situations. And this comes, of course, on the heels of the outrageous Texas court decision that would effectively ban medications. Over half would literally ban medication abortion, over half of all abortions in this country, even in states where abortion is still legal. So this week, Americans will be able to see the clear difference between Republicans and Democrats. Democrats are fighting to protect and restore abortion rights, and Republicans are fighting to strip them away. You know, before I was in the Senate, I worked at Planned Parenthood, and I did battle with these extremist Republicans every day, and I know what this is. This is it is clear, their determination to strip away abortion rights as a feature of their party, not a bug, but as a feature. This goal is about enacting a national ban on abortion. Republicans have confirmed these extremist activist judges. They're holding up promotions of military personnel as leverage to strip away life-saving care for service members. They are attempting to deny veterans medically necessary care, and they're doing great damage to women's health care state by state. Witness Governor DeSantis signing a 6-week abortion ban into law at 11 at night, effectively banning abortion. These extremist Republicans seem to think that they know better than women whose lives and stories they will never know. And I can tell you, for women, this is personal. And it is creating chaos for them and for their providers, and it is dangerous. And American people see it for what it is.
Thank you. 3 great speeches. Go ahead, Manu.
If Senator Feinstein is not able to return this work period, do you think she should consider resigning?
Look, I spoke to Senator Feinstein just a few days ago, and she and I are both very hopeful that she will return very soon. Yes, yes. Next one.
You're hopeful. That doesn't sound like there's a plan. And would you be willing to engage in horse trading, say, over the blue slip issue to get something done if you're that bottled up and committed?
Let me first say again, I spoke to Senator Feinstein just last Friday, and she and I are very hopeful she'll return soon. As for blue slips, Senator Durbin and the Judiciary Committee are considering it. Yes.
Have you selected or thought of who you would like to replace her?
Ben Cardin. Yes. This afternoon. Yes. Yes.
Earlier today, SEC Chairman Gary Gensler said that if we don't raise the debt ceiling, it's going to cause one heck of a mess in the capital markets. There's word that the House Republicans are trying to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act as a compromise in the package.
Look.
So, do you find that there could be compromise? Do you know what the compromise could be?
Yeah, the compromise is very simple. It's what's been done successfully the last 3 times, twice under President Trump, once when both houses were Republican, once when one house was Republican, one Democrat, and then under Biden. And that is a bipartisan solution with no hostage-taking, no brinksmanship, and we pass a clean debt ceiling. There's certainly time to discuss budget cuts, tax increases. That's called the budget process, and it should never be attached to debt ceiling. That's dangerous. And in the direction that Speaker McCarthy is headed in could lead us into default, which would have huge damage to the American people in terms of higher costs. Prices will go up in so many different things. In terms of an economy tanking, as was said before, and in terms of lost jobs. Go ahead. Clean debt ceiling is the way to go. Yes.
Do you expect to hold any votes anytime soon on legislation addressing the 6 abortion ban in Florida or the judge's decision invalidating the FDA?
Look, this decision is an awful decision, and Democrats are looking at every way we can to limit its harmful, terrible effects on women. Yes.
The House tomorrow is going to pass a bill that would overturn local D.C. laws similar to the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Do you want to see that bill come up for a vote in the Senate, or are you going to try to block it?
Well, we can't block it. They would have a right to bring it up. But this bill, which the President has already said he's vetoed, has some very reasonable reforms. It does not go as far as the George Floyd bill does, and I expect we'll be able to block it. Thank you, everybody.
What? On what? Of course not. It's zero. Or is